Welcome and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Rachel Nabers. With me today is Alana Brown and Eric Restrepo from the Nabers Group and Solo401k.com team. We are going to be getting started here in just a moment. We're just giving people a chance to join. I can see that new attendees are coming in every second or so. While we're going and getting started, on the chat on this side of the page, you should see, you should see chat on the side of the page. So just let us know, can you see us? Can you hear us? Alana, Eric, go ahead and say hello. We can make sure all of our mics are working.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Okay.
How's everybody? So, everybody doing good?
Just let us know on this side of the screen. Can you see us and hear us? Okay, excellent. Yeah, we're just giving people another minute or so to join, and then we're going to be getting right into this topic of this proposed reconciliation bill. We're really glad that you're all here with us. We're going to dig into some of the specifics, and if you haven't done so already in the network, Eric, maybe if you can grab a copy of that article and post it in the chat. Eric wrote a wonderful article detailing the sections of the proposed bill that we're going to be covering this evening. So if you're looking to read up more on this topic, then definitely check out that article that we have prepared for you. Okay, well, we do have a presentation for you. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Give me just one moment, and I'm going to share my screen. Just as a little side note here, if you ever have any trouble seeing us or hearing us, this is usually best attended by a desktop or laptop computer. So if you're on a mobile device or a tablet, if possible, get over to a desktop or a laptop computer. And if there is any audio or video hiccups, that can usually be solved simply by refreshing your screen. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive in. This afternoon, this evening, we're going to be discussing the bill provision in the infrastructure bill and how these proposals affect self-directed retirement plans. Of course, as we get into this, this is not tax, legal, or investment advice. We're here to educate and inform you so that you can make the best decisions that are right for you. For those of you that are new to us, we've been in this industry for a long time. We launched the IRA LLC in 2003 and Solo401k.com in 2006. We work closely with the IRS and the Department of Labor on an ongoing basis, and we specialize in something called checkbook control. What that means is that you are in control of your retirement funds and how they are invested. So of course, when we see proposals like this that could potentially threaten your ability to control your own investments, we want to make sure that we can help to educate you and inform you so that you can be empowered. And why we're here today is that there are certain provisions in what they're calling the reconciliation bill inside of the infrastructure bill that can potentially directly affect your IRA. This provision to the bill was proposed by the House Ways and Means Committee as a part of a reconciliation package trying to get this massive $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill passed. This provision that we're going to touch on today includes several sections. There's proposed increases to the corporate tax rate, increases in capital gains tax rates, all kinds of other little provisions about, if you're a diesel fuel dyer, like DYE, dying diesel fuel. There's a lot in there, but there's also proposed changes to retirement plans. This is the first time in 47 years that Congress has proposed changes to IRA accounts. And these changes can potentially severely limit what you can invest in, how you can invest and control your own retirement account, and in worst case scenarios may even cause forced distributions or taxation. Now, before we begin, let's have a quick reality check. The language in the proposed bill as written, we don't like it, right? But we can take solace knowing that this is just a bill. It's not a law yet. We have time to make our voices heard, and Congress still has time to revise the language in a bill or in this bill. As a reminder, there's a process, there's a procedure how a bill becomes a law. The bill is introduced, it goes to committee, then the House votes, the Senate votes, the president signs or vetoes the bill, and then only after the president signs does it become a law. So we're right here. We're in the committee stage. We're still really early on in this proposal. Now, that doesn't mean we want to sit back and be in inaction. What it means is that there's still plenty of time for us to, for Congress to make changes, and we have time to make a difference. What this bill means is these proposed changes to IRAs, if they are able even to be implemented, we think that the scope of this bill is going to be administratively really infeasible to implement. So you have to remember that in politics, it's a negotiation process, right? It's kind of like going to the car lot, and there's an offer and there's an acceptance and there's negotiation, and that goes back and forth. And sometimes things start by looking so bad that by the time that we end up where we think that things are much better, it's really where the people that have written the proposals or written the bills are trying to get to in the first place, right? That's the whole game of negotiation. Go way over to one side of the pendulum, then you come back and hopefully you meet somewhere in the middle. So there's probably, hopefully, some tiny portion of this bill that this committee is trying to get through, and maybe these retirement clauses could potentially be a distraction. What would be ultimately awesome is if they are done away with altogether. But even as if this bill goes through as written, which we believe is highly unlikely, it may be difficult to enforce. There's a lot of different people that are in control of their retirement funds, especially if you have checkbook control, you have some direct control over your assets. And let's remember that this process isn't over until the bill is passed. And hopefully it won't get anywhere close to being passed in its current iteration. We want to remember, we don't want just wait, like Wayne Gretzky said, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going. We've never seen a law like this pass, but we have seen many bills like this, where they wanted just this earlier this year to hike capital gains taxes way up. It's great for news, it's great for scaring people. Fortunately, that bill didn't go anywhere. We're hoping that the same thing might happen here. Just one moment, just need to make sure I've got everything all set up for our webinar here. Okay, yeah, less than 5% of bills become law. So there's a very good chance that this bill could be struck down or not get passed in committee. The House can vote to not pass it, or that it will need to have major amendments before that it changed. We're not going to snooze on this, of course, but we're going to keep these stats in mind. And I always think it's kind of funny how they name these bills. This particular bill is called Responsibly Fund Our Priorities. And there are 5 sections of the bill that are especially concerning, as written right now, to self-directed investors. So we're going to cover those sections one by one.
So the first section we're going to go over is the contribution limit for individual retirement plans of high income taxpayers with large account balances. So the new bill disallows further contributions to a Roth and traditional IRA if the total value of an individual's IRA and defined contribution retirement accounts, so that's your solo 401k, generally exceeds $10 million as of the end of the prior taxable year. This applies to single taxpayers or taxpayers married filing separately with a taxable income of over $400,000, For married taxpayers filing together, it's $450,000. And for head of households, it's going to be a taxable income over $425,000. Also, there's going to be a new annual reporting requirement for employer-defined contribution plans on an aggregate account balance in excess of $2.5 million, which we're doing the Form 5500 easy right now. So another form, not a huge deal, for us. I don't know why the IRS wants to do more work, but they do. The reporting would be to both the IRS and the plan participant whose balance is being reported. So some takeaway points here. So if you and your spouse are high earners or have large balances in your retirement plans, you may be prohibited from making new contributions. So large balances is per person across all retirement plans. The extra reporting will be required if your retirement plan is total of $2.5 million or more. The next section talks about increase in minimum required distributions for high income taxpayers with large retirement account balances. The current law states there are no required minimum distributions for Roth IRAs. For traditional IRAs, you do have your RMDs start at age 72. So for the proposed bill, now there's going to be RMDs where there wasn't before. So if the individuals combined traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, and defined contribution balances exceed $10 million at the end of the prior year, and also, the same rules from the section before, if you're a single filer and you're over $400,000, for married, it's $450,000. So then there is a new RMD, even on the Roth IRAs. So what is the RMD going to be? It's going to be 50% of the aggregate amount above $10 million. Let's take a look at an example. So James has a total of $18 million in his Roth IRA, solo 401k, and traditional IRA, so everything. James would have to distribute $4 million. How did I get that number? Took the $18 million minus the $10 million threshold. We get $8 million, and now 50% of that $8 million is $4 million. There are some additional rules. If your combined retirement account exceeds $20 million, then your Roth IRA or Roth accounts, like your Roth solo 401k, that needs to be distributed first until the balance falls below $20 million or the Roth accounts are depleted. So once the accounts are below that $20 million, then the person does have the choice of what funds to take, but you got to get below that 20 million. So, these may seem like big numbers, but you have to factor in inflation and asymmetric returns on investments, such as crypto, startups. So having a portfolio growing to $10 million is definitely possible, especially in the next 10 to 25 years. Investing in things like crypto and high growth startups, all great things that we love to do with our self-directed accounts. It could definitely affect you. So don't shy away from investments. Just know, the $10 million, it could be real. It may not sound real, but it absolutely can be. Just take a look at these comparisons. So this is 30 years ago, just comparing, home prices in Arizona from 1990 to now. You see, there's a huge difference there. So when you think that maybe, your $1 million in your retirement account may not go up to $10 million, it absolutely is a possibility. So this just kind of shows how inflation works and how your investments can definitely grow substantially.
Perfect. Thanks, Alana. Yeah, we're going to talk about next the tax treatment of rollovers to Roth IRAs and accounts. So obviously all of you guys on this webinar probably know Roth is a super powerful designation. It allows for after-tax contributions. Funds always grow tax-free. And if you distribute them obviously past the required age, 59 and a half, as long as you've had those funds in there for 5 years. All of that is forever tax-free. Roth contributions are currently under the current law allowed for both an IRA and for a 401k. Under the current law, the Roth IRA does have an income ceiling for contributions, right? So if you make too much money, typically, you're not able to contribute to a Roth. Those contribution levels are on the IRS website. Just remind you guys, it's $140,000 for a single and $208,000 for a married filing jointly. Really, that income limit for Roth conversion disappeared, though. What happened actually back in 2005, they passed the Tax Increase Prevention and Reconciliation Act. Basically, it opened up that back door, allowing for folks to then contribute funds indirectly to a Roth IRA. So let's look at that visually. Basically, if you're over those income limits, you can do this. This is what's called the backdoor Roth IRA, right? You can take that $6,000, contribute it to the IRA on a non-tax deductible basis. So that's after tax. And then you can wait a couple days and then do a Roth conversion, therefore effectively getting money into the Roth account, but without having to contribute it directly. So we can also apply that same logic to a solo 401k, right? So everybody might be on this webinar may or may not be familiar with the mega backdoor Roth 401k. Basically, regardless of income, you can do the same exact thing with a 401k. Let's go ahead and look at that visually. It's a little bit easier to see. Up to the full limits of the $58,000 for a 401k contribution can be contributed after tax, non-deductible, of course. Then waiting a couple of days later, that can then be converted over to a Roth, which can forever be a Roth 401k. Again, accomplishing the same thing as going direct, but with the backdoor approach. So with this bill, there would be no more Roth conversions for high earners starting in 2032. So that means we're not talking about the mega backdoor Roth there. We're talking about just people that have money in a traditional account that want to convert it over to Roth. They have the next 10 years basically to make all those conversions. And this is really only for folks who are really high earners, right? The $400,000 for a single, and then $450,000 for a married couple. So if you're in that category, you may want to make those conversions over the next 10 years. Obviously, again, this is just a bill, but looking ahead, that looks like that's what's going to happen. Also, in the bill, they talk about the end of that backdoor Roth. So virtually looks like starting at the end of next year, end of this year, starting in 2022, there will be no more backdoor Roth IRAs, as well as no more mega backdoor Roth 401ks if this bill were to pass. So is the Roth totally dead, right? Does it mean that we can't do any more Roth contributions? It's important to remember what's still left. Even if this bill were to pass in its current form, there's still a lot of ways to get money over to Roth. If you're under those income limitations for the Roth IRA, you can still contribute directly to that Roth IRA. Also, the Roth 401k, which all of our solo 401k plans, they all come equipped with that Roth bucket. So, and that regardless of income, you can still make contributions as an employee of your company. You can make contributions directly to Roth. If you're under 50, it's $19,500, and if you're 50 or older, it's $26,000. So that can be done, as well as also Roth conversions can still be done. Obviously, for anybody who is under those income limitations, that doesn't really affect you. You can do those conversions continually. And even those that do have those high incomes, you can still make those conversions over the next 10 years.
The next section we're going to discuss is about prohibiting IRA investments conditioned on the account holder's status. This is one section of the proposed bill that's gotten a lot of press. Essentially what this is trying to do is eliminate the ability for you to invest IRA funds in non-publicly traded securities if you are an accredited investor. And I think we all know one main appeal of self-directed retirement accounts is the ability to choose your own investments. And for most of us, this might mean a mix of traditional assets like Wall Street products, stocks, bonds, and funds, and private investments. This section of the bill provision aims to drastically reduce what your IRA can actually invest in. So for the way that this is affecting these us as IRA account holders is if you are an accredited investor, and the SEC defines an accredited investor as someone that has $1 million in net worth, not counting your home value, or if you make $200,000 or $300,000 per year for the last couple of years, if you're single or married, respectively. So if you're making good money, or if you have $1 million in assets, not counting your home, you're considered an accredited investor. And when you have that accredited investor status, the SEC considers you to be more sophisticated, and therefore you are allowed to invest in different types of investments, things like apartment syndications, hedge funds, venture capital funds, early stage startups, crowdfunding. And this has really blossomed, especially since 2016 when the Jobs Act was passed. A lot of these different crowdfunding platforms have opened up, and many of them specifically for accredited investors. And what this does is allow you to invest your IRA funds into these private deals. This provision of the bill aims to stop that completely. It says that if you have an IRA and you're an accredited investor, you cannot invest in deals specifically for accredited investors. So that means no hedge funds, no syndications, no private offerings that require you to be accredited. You can't use IRA funds to invest in those anymore. If you keep the investment as is and you don't sell, the IRA loses its tax protected status. In other words, this is a forced distribution if you don't sell or liquidate your position. But what happens if the asset is illiquid? As we stated, previously, a lot of times these accredited investor deals are things like apartment syndications or hedge funds or venture capital funds that might have a period, sometimes of several years, of illiquidity. This bill proposes to give you 2 years to distribute the investment or divest. If you don't distribute or divest in that time, then it's considered a distribution. The IRA investment loses its tax protected status. We think that this is probably very short-sighted. It ignores second and third order consequences of divesting. Not only could this be challenging to you as an IRA investor if you can't get out of an illiquid asset, but let's say that you're invested in an apartment syndication and maybe you've got a 3 to 5 year time horizon. That's not going to be that easy to get those funds back to you. We've got an example here. Let's say FERA invested Roth IRA funds into a venture capital fund in 2018. And this venture capital fund invests in early stage companies. The fund has a lockup of 7 years. So FERA invests with her IRA. She's an accredited investor. She understands that this asset will be essentially illiquid for 7 years. If this bill passes as written, FERA would somehow have to divest and get her money out of the fund. Otherwise, it would be considered a distribution. Now, when we're talking about these second and third order consequences, the VC fund is not ready or able to give her money back. There's this lockup of the funds for 7 years. But also think about the VC fund has distributed assets to these early stage companies. They don't have the assets to give back to the VC fund, to give back to FERA, because now she needs to get out of this investment early. So what does she do? If this investor has put Roth IRA funds, now she might need to take a distribution from the Roth IRA before she wants to, before their funds are qualified, and pay taxes on that distribution amount, even from a Roth IRA. So we think that there's probably some gray areas that are going to really pop up. This will be challenging, we think, to enforce from an administrative perspective. And there's just a lot of second and third order consequences that we think make this section of the proposed bill really detrimental. As currently written, there's no grandfather clause to this section. That can be revised. We hope that it will be revised, but right now there is no grandfather clause to this section. In short, what this means is your IRA can no longer invest in any deal where you have to be accredited. And if your IRA is already invested, you have 2 years to get your money out or face tax consequences. Essentially, what this is doing is it's driving money into traditional assets, into Wall Street deals, into publicly available securities, rather than allowing IRAs to invest in non-publicly registered securities. And the final section of the proposed bill that we want to cover discusses the prohibition of investment of IRA assets in entities in which the owner has a substantial interest. And this one is really interesting. This has got a lot of press too. On its face, I actually think that this provision, if you don't dig into it that much, makes a bit of sense. You know, the point of an IRA is to invest for the benefit of the retirement plan itself. And self-dealing transactions, which are a prohibited transaction, aim to benefit you, the individual, rather than the plan owner. As a self-directed IRA account holder, especially with a checkbook IRA, as the trustee of your own checkbook solo 401k, you're the fiduciary. And that means it's your fiscal responsibility to act in the best interest of the plan, not yourself. You want to be thinking about your retirement future. Now, what's interesting in this provision is that self-dealing is already a prohibited transaction, and it's already clearly defined in Internal Revenue Code Section 4975. We have this list of what are called disqualified persons, and these are people who are prohibited from transacting to or from and with the IRA or the 401k. This includes you, right, as the account holder, immediate family members if you go up and down your bloodline, parents, children, and also any entities that are owned by those disqualified persons. So if you own a corporation or a partnership where you own 50% or more, that entity is off limits from doing deals with your IRA or your 401k. Similarly, if you had someone in your bloodline up and down, right, your mom is a 15% officer or director of a shareholder of an entity, that would be a disqualified person as well. What this provision is aiming to do is bring down that limit from 50% ownership to 10% ownership, again, for investments that are not tradable on an established securities market, so for private companies, small businesses. So again, this prohibits what would otherwise be an allowable private investment. Let's say that your dad runs a company. He's the CEO and he's a 25% owner of a company that you really believe in. As the law stands right now, even with prohibited transaction brought into the mix, according to the Internal Revenue Code, your IRA could invest in that entity where your dad is the CEO. He's only a 25% owner. That would be allowable, less than a 50% owner. What this provision would do is even take that deal off the table because he owns more than 10%. The bill also eliminates the ability for you to invest your IRA funds if you are an officer in an entity at any percentage. Similar to the last section that we discussed, as currently written, there is no grandfather clause. And just like the last section, if your IRA is already invested in a company in which you or a disqualified person owns 50%, or excuse me, 10% or more, you have 2 years to get your money out or potentially face tax consequences. Now that we've covered a little bit about these individual sections, we want to talk about how to take action. Of course, one of the first things and easiest things to do is to contact your representatives, to contact your senators. Let them know that you do not support the proposed bill as written. We've created a page at solo401k.com/Congress for links on how to contact your congressmen and senators. And this is important, right? We elect these people, these officials, to represent us. So if they are not representing us because they are potentially voting on a proposed bill that's not in alignment with what we believe in, then we want to make our voices heard. And we want to let them know that if they vote on a bill like this, then that's no longer representing us. And that is something that we remember as citizens when we go to the polls and when we go to, when elections come around. Another important action item that you can take is that if you do not yet have a solo 401k or a checkbook IRA, set one up now. These bills are often rewritten with grandfather clauses. And if the window of opportunity is closing for you to have real control over your assets, you need to set yourself up now to be able to retain control over those funds. If you're a current client of ours, you already have a checkbook control, IRA, or solo 401k, and you're waiting on rollovers, get them going now. Again, if there are grandfather clauses that can be added to this, you want those assets in your direct control. If your assets are held with a custodian, we have a bit of fear that they could get stuck in what we call bureaucratic purgatory. Billions of dollars are already stuck there. Some of you have probably already encountered challenges just in trying to get your funds rolled out of a custodian. Think about if more laws are heaped on top of the already heavy custodial burden, that's going to slow things down even more. So you want to get your assets in your direct control with a checkbook, IRA, or solo 401k now while you can. And you know, this is something that we're going to continue to cover. We're going to continue to keep you updated on our network at solo401k.net, through blog posts on our website at solo401k.com. We encourage you to remain engaged. It's so easy to just go, gosh, well, I guess they killed mega backdoor Roth. No, they did not. That is not what happened. We do not follow bills. We follow laws. So right now, this is still a bill. This has not been yet made into a law. It's still, remember, at the very beginning of that whole process of how a bill becomes a law. So it is not too late to make your voice heard, and it is not too late to take action. And so I know we've got some questions here. We're going to jump into those. Yes, Rock, you're right. I've been singing the Schoolhouse Rocks song all week. Just ask anyone on the team, and you'll hear me walking around going, I'm just a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Yes. So you're right. There's a process to this of how a bill becomes a law. You know, John, it's interesting what, and Jeff also, you said it's Peter Thiel. We have him to thank. You know, I think that there's sort of a double-edged sword here. So it's true that I think it can be, you know, powerful for you to say to your representative, like, hey, look, I'm not Peter Thiel. I'm an accredited investor, but I'm also a normal, hardworking American. And if I have $800,000 in my IRA, or I have $200,000 or $20,000, I still get to decide where those funds are invested. So to try to punish hardworking Americans, middle-class Americans, based on the actions of one person, I think is really short-sighted. And I think it's not going to accomplish what they think it's going to accomplish. And Alana and Eric, stop me if I'm too much on the soapbox here. I think what they're trying to do is make an example out of someone. And the reality is that, first of all, Peter Thiel is an incredible innovator. Okay, he was one of the inventors of PayPal, and we want to encourage innovation and small business ownership and founders in our country. We really, really do. We don't want to, you know, be so punitive to them, or else that's when ideas start to go away, you know, Galt's Gulch style. But I think that what happened with Peter was a really like a flash in the pan, once in a million years kind of an amazing thing, where you can take $2,000 in Roth IRA, throw it into something like PayPal, and then it becomes worth $5 billion. To write sweeping legislation as if that's happening to all of us because we're investing in REITs or apartment syndications or, you know, crowdfunding sites, I think is really short-sighted. So, okay, a couple of you have also posted John Heyer's excellent site, handsoffmyira.com. John is awesome. We love him. If you go to solo401k.com/Congress, we also have a link directly to John's site, Hands Off My IRA. He really goes into this in detail and gives some really, interesting commentary. John always has colorful commentary, and he also shares ways to contact your senator as well. So let's go ahead and dig into a couple of these questions. The first question comes from Eric. Is the Roth IRA income limit being increased from $140,000 or $208,000 to $400,000 or $450,000? Eric, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the limit's not being increased. So the Roth IRA limit is still the same. It's still 140,000 for a single person and 208,000. What is happening is that they're stopping Roth conversions for those higher income folks. So if you do make 400,000 as a single person or 450,000 as a married couple, the Roth conversion is what they're going after. So over the next 10 years, they're allowing it, which is, in my opinion, a little bit strange. It almost like it welcomes it for the next 10 years. And then really the next political cycle, who knows what's going to happen, right? Like, again, this is just a bill. And this is, again, 10 years out. Are we really going to, is anything really going to happen with this at all? Or is the next political cycle just going to, crush that provision, right? So yeah, nothing happening with the Roth. What's happening is that the backdoor Roth is being affected with this legislation or proposed legislation. So for those folks that are above those limitations, the backdoor Roth is what's being affected, right? So if you make above those, the 140,000 as a single person or 208,000 as a married couple, then they're closing the back door. You can't do a non-deductible contribution to an IRA and then convert it over to a Roth. Similarly, with the mega backdoor Roth solo 401k, you're not going to be able to do that as well if this bill passes, right? That's
as
if this
written,
bill passes.
right?
As written. And if it's not watered down or changed in any manner. So, good question.
Okay, our next question comes from Tom. Tom says, how does this bill affect checkbook IRA LLC setups? Alana, you want to take this one?
So as of now, it doesn't affect the setup. It just affects, whether you can make the new contributions if you're over that limit, and then also what you can invest in, with that, taking away that if you're an accredited investor, you can invest in syndications and REITs. So you may not be able to invest in those kind of things. As for setup, it shouldn't affect that. So.
Good question. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tom. Okay, our next question here from Brian. Brian says, is the effect of the elimination of mega backdoor Roth, and again, let's get our language right, guys. This is a proposal of this elimination, right? Thoughts become things. We want to focus on the positive here. This is just a bill. It is not yet a law. The mega backdoor Roth has not been eliminated. This is something that they're trying to put through that can get struck down. It can get watered down. There can be grandfather clauses. So Brian, with your permission, I'm going to slightly revise your question. Is the effect of the proposal of the elimination of mega backdoor Roth that you have to have a much higher salary to get to the maximum 58K limit for a Roth per year through a regular conversion of pre-tax funds? Eric, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, is that, they kind of, they closed one door and then they left open another. But yeah, in effect, right, if you're a high earner in general, you're still able to just make those fully deductible contributions to the pre-tax side of either IRA or to a 401k. And then you can do that. You still have the conversion ability, right? So the taxes on the conversion, unlike with a non-deductible contribution, but they're leaving that window open for the next 10 years. And really for anybody, even beyond that, if you're a high earner, or if you're not a high earner, like above those limits that they set, right? And again, it's a proposal. This is not a law. It's a bill. So if you don't like it, let's make our voice heard, right? So.
Next question comes from Brian. Brian says, does the bill affect the ability to make loans to private entities or other non-disqualified people from a solo 401k? Alana, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. It doesn't seem that way.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Right, it's you. So the answer is probably not.
That's an interesting thought, actually. So it may be like, instead of investing in I don't know how you would structure that, but like instead of investing in an apartment syndication, if you made like a loan to a syndicator, right, you're not actually investing in it. I think that, those types of compliant alternatives are the type of ingenuity that we really appreciate about the self-directed investor industry. So yeah, Brian, as it stands right now, this bill doesn't affect your ability to make loans to private entities or non-disqualified people at all. It's a good question, really good question. Okay, next question comes from Tom. Let me clarify about the checkbook control IRA question. As I understand it, if the bill is passed, IRAs will not be able to invest in a single member LLC where the IRA owner is an officer. As a manager of my IRA LLC, I'm considered an officer. So my concern is that I would have to disinvest my IRA from the LLC within the 2-year window. Actually, Tom, no, we haven't seen that. That has been something that people have been concerned about. But the manager, what we have heard from our attorneys at this time is that the manager is not an officer or director. So the IRA would not have to divest from the LLC. So the checkbook IRA LLC should remain intact. It's not the same as investing in like an entity that you're wholly owning or acting as an officer. So no, we don't believe that this will affect IRA LLCs. Good question. Next question from Brian. Does this affect the ability to hold crypto in a hardware wallet or stake crypto in a solo 401k? Eric, do you want to take that one?
I wouldn't think so, right? I mean, I think
I would agree.
It's more, yeah, I wouldn't think so just because of the fact that, it's not an organization or a business, right? Like that's just an alternative asset. So yeah, any crypto totally allowable still. So I don't think that there's anything to be concerned about that at all.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Good question, Brian. Next question comes from Maria. Maria says, if I have a Roth solo 401k, am I allowed to contribute up to 26 grand, I'm in my 60s, of after-tax funds and have it grow tax-free, just like a Roth IRA? I'll take this one, Maria. It's a good question, and I think this is kind of like nerd stuff here, but with a Roth IRA, they grow tax-free. Your money grows tax-free only if you don't take it out until it's qualified. So let's say you're a 35-year-old person putting money into a Roth IRA. It's not just growing tax-free if you take it out when you're 40. So in order to have qualified distributions from a Roth IRA, which means they're tax-free, you have to fulfill 2 things. You have to have held the funds in the account for 5 years or more, and you have to be age 59 and a half or older. So with a Roth solo 401k, it is similar, but this is where the nerd stuff comes in. After tax is not the same as Roth. Roth is a designation of after tax. So if you've ever talked to me about mega backdoor Roth, you've heard my rule, which is that all Roth money is after tax. Not all after tax money is Roth. So Maria, what you can do is if you have a Roth solo 401k, you can make Roth 401k contributions. And then yes, those grow tax-free just like a Roth IRA. And I don't want to be nitpicky about that, but with the language in this proposed bill trying to stop after-tax contributions specifically converting to Roth, you're making Roth 401k direct contributions rather than after tax. So it's just a little nitpicky thing, but yes, if you have a Roth solo 401k, you can contribute that full 26k to your Roth 401k and have it grow just like your Roth IRA. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions here. Ken says, so this bill affects people that make $450,000 and they have 10 million in assets. Do both parameters need to be met for the bill to be relevant? Depends on the section, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, for the sections that Alana covered on limitations on new contributions and on forced RMDs, that is, yes, it's the combination of you're earning 400,000 or 450 as a married couple, and you have 10 million in assets. But for the and I think also Eric, for yours, the
Yeah.
after the Roth conversions, that was some of the
Yep.
threshold as well. But if you're a normal IRA account holder, then the limitation on the 50% drop down to 10% as far as what you can invest in, and the accredited investor status doesn't have anything to do with the amount of assets you have in your plans, and it doesn't have anything to do with the amount of money that you're earning. And there was someone, Russell brought something really smart up earlier in the chat. He said 450,000 for a married couple is not going to seem like a high earner in 10 years. That barely qualifies today in most major cities. And I think, Russell, you're really tapping into something here. So, you know, we can sort of sit here and go like, 10 million, but what do they need all that money for? 20 million, geez, 400,000, 450,000. But that it ignores the creep of inflation, right? The creep of inflation, as Alana showed in her presentation, that chart just in the last 30 years, an average home price in Arizona went from what, 79 grand to like $225,000. So these are big increases. And I think that, you know, if you have a couple of doctors, a lawyer and a software consultant that are married, you'll find that you can probably approach that 400 to 450K threshold more quickly than you would have maybe thought otherwise. And if you know are making good crypto investments, or you're investing in early stage companies, then you can, as Alana mentioned, you know, you can turn 800 grand or $1 million or a couple of million. That can grow, you know, quite large, quite quickly. So, okay, Jesse says, Kevin had a note, the 400 to 450K is said to be indexed for inflation. Yeah, we'll see what happens with that, Kevin. So the CPI also used to be a bit more reflective until they took out things like fuel. So yes, I agree with you that I would hope that that's indexed to inflation, but I wouldn't hang my whole hat on it as a way to necessarily be protected from being forced to do distributions and things. Okay, Jesse says, the forcing of all small businesses with 5 or more employees to form retirement accounts for all employees. Will this affect qualifications for a solo 401k? Wouldn't this cause problems for owners of multiple businesses not currently offering simple IRAs? Jesse, I think that this is a little bit of a different conversation, probably dealing with something called a controlled group. If you do not yet have a plan with us, then we would encourage you to set one up or schedule a call with Alana and Eric so that you can discuss how this might affect you. I think that's probably a little bit outside of the realm of today's conversation, but it is certainly a question that should be answered, and that one you're going to want to dive into, especially if you do own multiple businesses and if some of those businesses have employees. And speaking of which, if you do not yet have an account with us, I've made a little button down here somewhere along of the page. I think it's really important that you get these funds into your direct control while you can now. Okay, we got time for, I think, 1 or 2 more questions. Gary says, so any asset that requires accredited investor status would no longer be allowed? This could be how they force people to sell their crypto in the future. Well, you know, you don't have to be accredited to buy crypto, Gary. So anyone can buy Bitcoin. Anyone in the whole world right now can buy Bitcoin. That does not require accredited investor status. So I don't think crypto is going to be a disallowed investment, at least not with anything that we're seeing here, thankfully. But I'm glad that you're bringing that up. It's good to be thinking these things through and seeing how they might affect you. Okay, we've got time for 1 more question here from Kathy. Kathy says, you created an LLC to allow my solo 401k to hold land or agricultural investments in Panama, as the country does not allow 401ks to hold title to the property. Thank you, Kathy. Yes, we did form the LLC for your solo 401k so that you could choose whatever investments were right for you. Kathy says, under this proposed bill, we could not use the LLC we just created, yet we can't hold title in the name of the 401k trust. I think that this is similar to the checkbook IRA LLC question, Kathy. Alana, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. From what we're hearing from our attorneys, compliance team, banks that we work with, the IRA-owned LLCs and the 401k-owned LLCs do not seem to be affected here. So, before we close, I have some points. I'm going to post them here in the chat. I don't know if they're going to be numbered really nicely. Let me see if I can just maybe do them one by one. Our founder and CEO, Jeff Nabers, had some really nice ways to tie this up for us and wanted to share his thoughts. So first is, this bill is not passed, and it might not pass. Less than 5% of bills become law. And, it's common for radical bills to be written and never pass. It's also common for radical bills to get watered down significantly and then pass. When changes to tax laws do happen, grandfathering is very common. Our recommendation is to get checkbook control of all of your retirement funds as soon as possible. Bring all, even traditional assets, under checkbook control to maximize your chances of freedom of movement between asset classes. You have control over your assets now. If you don't, we can help you to do that by establishing a checkbook IRA or a solo 401k structure. So again, the bill is not passed. It might not pass. Less than 5% of bills become law. It's really common for radical bills to be written and never pass. It's common for radical bills to get watered down significantly and then pass. When changes to the tax laws happen, grandfathering is very common, and our recommendation is to get your checkbook control of your assets now, even those traditional assets. Get them under your checkbook control. We can help you open bank or brokerage accounts to ensure that you retain control of those assets so that they are where they belong, which is in your control. Anything else to add, Alana or Eric, before we finish up for today?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think a lot of us were very reactive to this bill because, of course, it's shocking. It feels like, they just kind of threw this thing together and didn't really think about what they put in it and how it was going to affect all of us, especially the people that aren't wealthy. But I think it is important to be realistic, just like everything that Rachel put in over there, from what Jeff said. It's very, 5% of bills become laws. So I think it's really important to at first be reactive, be realistic, and then, be productive, do something about it. And that's why we are here right now.
And we're definitely not saying complacency, right? We're not saying just sit back, don't worry about it. Oh, only 5%. All of us here on the webinar and all of our team have taken action. We are contacting our representatives. We're letting them know that we are opposed to these sections of the proposed bill. We're making our voices heard, and you should too. So balance the two, make your voice heard, speak your mind, let your representative know how you want to be represented, right? And if this bill does not represent you and what you believe, let them know. Share that, share your voice, let them know. And at the same time, do what you can, which is take action to get your assets into your own control. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today. We will continue to keep you updated as this progresses, as it evolves, hopefully becomes watered down and maybe just gets struck down altogether. If you have questions, if you have concerns, make sure you join us in the network at solo401k.net. It's free. It's open to anyone that wants to join or post there. And we've got a lot of great discussion happening specifically around these topics and others. So as always, we are here to help and to serve. We hope you have an awesome rest of your day and be well. We'll see you soon.